Behind every locked door lies a story the world was never meant to hear. Welcome to Behind Bars TV, where we uncover the hidden realities of the world's toughest prisons, untold inmate experiences, and the systems built to contain them. From supermax facilities to forgotten penitentiaries, we reveal the truth behind concrete walls and razor wire. This is not fiction. This is the world behind bars. The most notorious prison murders ever solved. How investigators uncovered the truth behind locked doors. A locked cell, steel doors, surveillance cameras, controlled movement. And yet, a crime still happened inside. No public access. No easy escape routes. No outside interference. Just one question. How did it happen? And how was it solved? Some of the most complex investigations in criminal justice don't happen on the streets. They happen inside prisons, where every movement is tracked, and every mistake leaves a trace. Today, we're uncovering the most notorious prison murders ever solved. Not to sensationalize them, but to understand how investigators piece together the truth in places designed to hide it. Why prison murders are different. When a crime happens outside, investigators deal with uncertainty, unknown suspects, unknown timelines, unknown locations. But inside a prison, everything changes. Correctional facilities are controlled environments. Movement is logged. Cameras monitor key areas. Inmates are counted regularly. Staff presence is constant. At first glance, this should make investigations easier. But in reality, it makes them more complicated. Because when something happens inside prison, it raises a difficult question. How did it occur in a place designed to prevent it? Investigators must examine gaps in supervision, blind spots in surveillance, internal dynamics between inmates, communication patterns before the incident. Every detail matters. Because inside prison, nothing happens without leaving some form of trace. The timeline is everything. In prison investigations, time becomes the most valuable piece of evidence. Every movement is recorded. Cell checks, meal distribution, yard time, lockdown periods. Investigators reconstruct events minute by minute. They ask, who was where? Who had access? What changed from routine? Even small delays matter. A missed check, a door left unsecured, an unexpected movement. Former investigators often describe it as rebuilding a moment that no one fully saw. Because while cameras exist, not every angle is covered. And while logs exist, not every action is recorded. The truth lies in connecting gaps. Motive inside locked walls. Understanding motive inside prison requires a different lens. Common factors include personal conflicts, debt or disputes, group tensions, reputation and status. Unlike outside environments, relationships inside prison are intensified. There is no distance, no escape from daily interaction. Conflicts don't disappear. They build. And investigators must determine, was this spontaneous or something that developed over time? That distinction shapes the entire case. The case that shouldn't have been possible. The incident happened inside a high-security housing unit, a place where movement was restricted. Cells were locked for most of the day. Officers conducted routine checks. Surveillance cameras monitored the tier. At first, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. Routine counts were completed. Meal service followed schedule. No alarms were triggered. But during a standard check, staff discovered something unexpected. An inmate unresponsive inside a secured area. No sign of forced entry. No immediate witnesses. No clear explanation. The location raised immediate concern. How could something happen in a place with controlled access? The scene didn't match the environment. And that's what made the case so complex. Reconstructing the unseen. With no direct witnesses, investigators turned to reconstruction. They began with three critical sources: surveillance footage, officer logs, inmate movement records. Each piece alone was incomplete, but together they began to form a timeline. Investigators noticed A short window where movement wasn't clearly visible. A routine interaction that lasted longer than expected. A pattern of behavior that didn't match previous days. They slowed footage down, frame by frame. They compared logs with video, minute by minute. And slowly, a picture started to emerge. Not obvious, not immediate, but consistent. Former investigators described this stage as finding meaning in what looks like nothing. The detail that changed everything. Breakthroughs in prison investigations often come from small details. In this case, it wasn't a major event. It was something subtle, a brief moment on camera, an interaction that seemed routine at first glance. But when investigators revisited it repeatedly, they noticed a change in body language, a delay that didn't align with protocol, a movement that appeared out of sequence. It was enough to shift the direction of the case. That moment connected a person, a location, a time frame. And once those three aligned, the investigation moved forward rapidly. Because in controlled environments, small inconsistencies carry significant weight. Identifying the suspect. Inside prison, identifying a suspect is different from the outside world. There are no unknown crowds. Everyone is already accounted for. Investigators narrowed their focus using movement logs, surveillance timing, proximity to the incident. One individual stood out, not because of obvious behavior, but because of consistency in the timeline. They were present during the critical window, positioned near the location, unaccounted for in a small gap. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. But when placed within the reconstructed timeline, their presence became significant. Former investigators often describe this moment as when possibility turns into probability. But probability is not proof. And inside a prison case, proof must be precise. Interviews and silence. Once a suspect is identified, interviews begin. But prison interviews are unique. Inmates often avoid direct answers, protect their own position, remain silent to avoid consequences. Investigators must rely on indirect questioning, behavioral observation, cross-referencing statements. In this case, responses were limited. Short answers, careful wording, long pauses, no direct admission. But inconsistencies appeared. Statements that didn't align with recorded timelines, surveillance footage, other accounts. And in investigations, inconsistency is a signal, not proof, but a direction. Building the case. With no confession, investigators turned to structure. They built the case using timeline reconstruction, surveillance alignment, behavioral analysis, physical evidence from the scene. Each piece alone was not definitive, but together they formed a pattern. A sequence that placed the suspect at the scene, matched the time frame, aligned with observed behavior. This is how many prison cases are solved. Not through a single moment, but through accumulation, layer by layer, until the explanation becomes the most logical conclusion. And once that threshold is reached, the case moves forward. When charges are filed, after weeks, sometimes months, of investigation, the case reaches a critical point. Prosecutors review the evidence. They ask one question: is there enough to prove this beyond reasonable doubt? In prison cases, that threshold is higher than it seems, because there are rarely direct witnesses. Surveillance may be incomplete. Statements can be inconsistent. But in this case, the accumulated evidence was strong enough. Charges were filed, formally, publicly, and once that happens, the case shifts from investigation to prosecution. The courtroom strategy inside the courtroom. The story must be retold, but this time it must be proven. Prosecutors focus on the timeline, the presence of the suspect, the alignment of evidence. They present a structured narrative, step by step, minute by minute, detail by detail. Defense attorneys respond differently. They focus on doubt. They argue. The timeline is incomplete. The evidence is circumstantial. The investigation made assumptions. Because in court, doubt matters, even small doubt. And in complex prison cases, doubt is often the strongest defense. The verdict. After the arguments are made, the decision moves to the jury. They review evidence, testimony, timeline consistency, and they face a difficult task to decide based not on certainty, but on proof beyond reasonable doubt. In this case, the outcome was clear. The accumulation of evidence was enough. The timeline held. The inconsistencies aligned. And the verdict reflected that. The case that once seemed impossible to solve had been reconstructed, proven, and resolved. The second case, conflicting stories. Unlike the first case, this incident was not discovered quietly. It followed a disturbance. Multiple inmates were present in the area. Staff responded quickly. Movement was restricted almost immediately. But when investigators began reviewing what happened, they encountered a problem. The accounts didn't match. Some inmates described one version. Others described something completely different. Even small details varied. Who was present? When events started? Where individuals were positioned? This created a challenge. Because when multiple narratives exist, investigators must determine which details are reliable and which are shaped by perspective or intention. Separating fact from noise. When stories conflict, investigators rely on structure. They compare statements against surveillance, timelines against logs, individual accounts against each other. Patterns begin to emerge. Some details repeat across multiple accounts. Others appear only once. Investigators focus on consistent elements, verifiable moments, objective records. Everything else becomes secondary. This process is slow because removing unreliable information is just as important as finding reliable evidence. One investigator described it as, "You don't just look for truth, you remove everything that can't be proven." The role of group dynamics. In this case, individual actions couldn't be understood in isolation. They had to be viewed through group dynamics. Inside prison, groups often share information, align responses, protect internal interests. This can influence what is said, what is left unsaid, how events are described. Investigators must consider, is this an individual action or part of a larger interaction? Because when multiple people are involved, responsibility becomes harder to define. And proving individual involvement requires separating one role from many. The recording that shifted the case. The breakthrough didn't come from testimony. It came from footage. Not a clear, direct recording, but a sequence captured across multiple cameras. Individually, each clip seemed ordinary. But when investigators synchronized them, a pattern appeared. They identified movement across different areas, timing between locations, individuals entering and leaving key spaces. The sequence revealed something important, a consistent chain of events, not obvious at first, but undeniable when viewed together. Former investigators often describe moments like this as when separate pieces finally start speaking the same language. Defining individual roles. With the timeline clearer, investigators shifted focus. Who did what? In cases involving multiple individuals, this step is critical because presence alone is not enough. Investigators must determine who was directly involved, who was nearby but uninvolved, who influenced events indirectly. They mapped movements against camera footage, statements, physical evidence, and slowly roles began to separate. Some individuals were ruled out. Others became central. Because once movement aligns with timeline, responsibility becomes clearer. From complexity to conclusion. What began as a chaotic case with conflicting accounts became structured. The final case included a verified timeline, correlated surveillance sequences, consistent evidence patterns. Prosecutors were able to present a clear narrative. not based on a single moment, but on a connected sequence of events. And that is how complex prison cases are solved. Not quickly, not simply, but through persistence, through structure, through detail, sentencing, consequences inside the system. When a prison crime is proven in court, sentencing carries a unique weight because the individuals involved are already inside the correctional system. Judges consider the nature of the offense, the environment in which it occurred, the impact on institutional safety, prior criminal history. In many cases, sentences are extended. Additional years are added. Security classifications may change. Housing assignments may be adjusted. Because the system must respond not only to the act, but to the risk it represents inside a controlled environment. Former prosecutors have emphasized crimes inside prison challenge the integrity of the system itself. And sentencing reflects that. What these cases reveal. These cases are not just about individuals. They reveal something deeper about systems. Prisons are designed for control, structure, supervision. And yet, even in controlled environments, incidents can occur. That does not mean the system fails entirely. But it does show that no system is perfect. Investigations inside prisons teach us. Small details matter. Patterns reveal truth. Persistence leads to answers. And most importantly, accountability exists even behind locked doors. Because when something happens inside prison, it is not hidden forever. It is examined, reconstructed, and eventually understood. Inside prison, every movement is tracked, every moment recorded. And yet, some of the most complex cases still unfold there. Not in the open, but behind steel doors and silent corridors. This documentary wasn't about the crime itself. It was about how the truth was uncovered. Because even in the most controlled environments, the truth leaves a trace. What you just saw is more than a story. It's a reality lived by thousands behind bars. If you believe in uncovering the truth, the kind hidden behind concrete walls and silence, then join us. Subscribe to Behind Bars TV and never miss a chapter in the world's most dangerous stories. Until next time, stay aware, stay informed, and remember, freedom and confinement are sometimes only a wall apart.